Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to this session, which you're aware is split in two. And we have the first session, which is by concern, looking at gender issues. And second, we have Mary Doyle from Valid Nutrition, looking at RUTF, local production. So you're really welcome. I'm Bernadette Crawford, and I'll be joined by Adele Fox, and we're both the equality advisors with Concern Worldwide. So we're facilitating this part of the session. We're going to start with a Mentimeter brainstorm, and then Adele will take you through the gender continuum and share examples that could be applied to CMAM programs. And put your comments in the chat, and we'll track them as we go along. So just to, I suppose, remind ourselves that, you know, when we talk about gender, and particularly gender inequality, we know that it remains one of the most pervasive and fundamental obstacles to alleviating extreme poverty. It's prevalent in all of the contexts that we work on, to varying degrees, causes women and girls, boys and men, to experience many aspects of poverty in life very differently, based on their different roles, their responsibilities, their status, their access to resources and services in society. And women and girls, particularly from a young age, are often treated and valued differently to men and boys, resulting in less access to resources, education, health services, employment, decision-making, and often at risk of violence. So we really see gender as one of those fundamental organization principles of society, and you know, we feel that a gender perspective is really important in any program design. So we just want to do a quick brainstorm using Mentimeter. Have a think about your experiences of CMAM programs, and what are the gender-related barriers to accessing and adhering to treatment. There should be a link in the chat box. There it is. So if you could put in one or two things that come to mind when you think of like those barriers, those gendered barriers in accessing and adhering to treatment in CMAM programs. So depending on context, but there are many things that would prevent someone from accessing treatment, or norms or cultural norms that make it difficult for some people. How are we doing, Adele? Do we have a few?
We don't have any yet.
Oh, okay. Thinking. And if you click on the blue link in the chat.
Okay, we have some coming through now. I think people are still thinking.
It's okay, maybe it's a difficult question. Even if we think of women in CMAM programs, and what are the kind of things that they face, and what kind of barriers do they face in terms of engaging?
At my screen now so we can see what we have.
Yeah, decision-making power, absolutely. Women's responsibility, time, workloads, yes. You can see that's a big one. Home tasks, decision-making power, money, distance to health centres, time, yeah. Priority to boys, Yeah, male staff, if there's not a lot of female staff, that can be a big barrier. Literacy, absolutely. Women's, less access to education, impacting literacy, which then can impact in terms of their access to information. Great. So fantastic. You've pulled out some of the really the key ones and the big ones. When we talk about workload, we're talking about gender roles and the roles of men and women in the context that we're working in, and in most contexts where women are primary caregivers, but they also have the additional household chores, collecting of water, agriculture, small business. They have many things. They have multiple heavy workloads, and that can really impact in terms of their ability to even to engage with programs, and increase that kind of responsibility on women. And decision making came out there as well, and that's a really significant one in terms of what is the different levels of decision making power in a household, and how does that then impact on things like how the money is used in the household, whether it's used for healthcare, whether it's used to go to the health centre. I mean, if the father, the husband, refuses, doesn't see it as important, doesn't have the time, and doesn't permit her to go with the child, then it has serious implications. And even things around decisions to use Plumpy Nut, often, it can end up on the market for increased income for the family. And is that power of decision making in the hands of women or men? And these are the things that we need to factor in and kind of understand. So thanks for pulling out that. There are many barriers, but I think they're some of the really critical ones. And rooted in all of these barriers is gender inequality, and I think we really need to factor that in within our programs, and that targeting women alone is certainly not going to address these underlying gender inequalities. So thanks for that. That brings us in nicely to what Adele is going to bring us through. She's going to bring us through the gender continuum and look at the various levels of that and link it into CMAM programs. So over to you, Adele.
Thanks, Bernadette. Okay, hi everyone. So yeah, we're going to look at the gender continuum, which some of you may have seen before. But this is a framework for looking at programs through a gender lens and looking at what the different ways are that we can integrate gender into our programming in any sector. So I'm going to talk you through very rapidly, because we don't have a long session, the different categories that make up this continuum, and try to use some nutrition related examples to illustrate them. So first of all, we know that in any context we work in, there are a set of roles and responsibilities that men and women, boys and girls, are expected to fulfill. There are expectations that are different for men and women, boys and girls. Sometimes there are different laws and policies that affect men and women differently. And there are almost always going to be power dynamics at play at the household level, at community level. So if we're not aware of those differences and those inequalities, then we can be said to be gender blind. And sometimes programs are designed in a gender blind way, which means they haven't taken into consideration these differences that exist from the get-go. So here's an example of a project that we worked on in Burundi. This was a care group model, and these are care group volunteers. They're all female, they're all mothers of children under 5, and they were selected to participate as volunteers because of that, because they were then in a good position to talk to other mothers of children under 5. What we found was that after some time of the project being implemented, these care group volunteers were dropping out. And when we looked into the reason for that, it was because their husbands were stopping them and preventing them because they didn't really understand why they were doing this work, this unpaid work, and they hadn't been engaged by the project, and they didn't really understand the benefits. So we had kind of designed this project. We'd specifically chosen mothers because that was the gender norm, but we had not taken into consideration the power dynamics that were at play at their homes that were going to impact their ability to participate in this program. That's an example of gender blind. So we want to be aware of those differences and those inequalities when we're designing any program, so that we get the maximum results, so that we allow people to participate in the program and to benefit from the program as planned. So once we're gender aware, we can then choose how we use that information. So one way is to kind of exploit those gender norms in order to achieve our program goals. So our program goals are still positive, but in the process of achieving those goals, we're actually reinforcing inequalities that already exist or negative stereotypes that already exist. So here's an example of another program from Sierra Leone. This was a child survival program, and we were encouraging women, mothers, to take their children to health centres, plus a lot of other health behaviours as well. But you'll see the tagline here is, "You are the mother, do what's best." So what this is doing is reinforcing the inequality that already exists, that women, that mothers should be the primary caretakers of children. So we're adding to their already high workload that some of you mentioned in the barriers. We're adding more to that, and we're saying that you're the only one that's responsible. There are no fathers in this picture. There were no fathers in any of the other pictures either. And men were not particularly engaged in this project. So what we're doing is firstly adding to the workload, adding to the responsibility, kind of excluding men from us saying that they have a role, and also assuming that these women alone are going to have the decision-making power to be able to make these decisions. So all of that kind of reinforces that we as an NGO, we're okay with these inequalities that exist, and we're reinforcing them for the benefit of achieving our own project goals. So then the next point on the continuum is accommodating. So this is about achieving our program goals by accommodating the gender norms that already exist. So we respond to the practical needs that our program participants have, and in doing so, we're accommodating the norms. We're not trying to change the norms, we're just accommodating them. We're working around them. So if we go back to this example from Burundi, when we found that the reason for the care group volunteers dropping out was their husbands, we then engaged the husbands. We worked with them so that they really understood the gravity of the health and nutrition problems in their community, and the work that their wives were doing, and how important it was, and what effect it could have for the benefit of the whole community. Essentially, what we were doing there was asking permission from those husbands if their wives could continue volunteering with us. We weren't trying to change the fundamental gender inequality there, which was that women had a lack of autonomy and a lack of decision-making power within their households. We were simply working within that norm and trying to find a way around the problem in order to achieve our goal. So accommodating or gender sensitive is really about finding solutions to problems, meeting people's needs, but doing so in a way that doesn't tackle any of those fundamental issues which may have caused the problem in the first place. So the last point on the continuum is transformative. So gender transformative programming is really going a step further than responding just to practical needs. It's really about looking at those fundamental issues that are related to equality and trying to address them directly and head on. So we're talking about attitude change, behaviour change, and fundamental shifts in perceptions and sometimes in cultures as well. But keeping the good parts and trying to get people to reflect on the negative or the harmful parts and change those. Just to point out, this is a continuum. So it's not, the categories are not black and white, and they do flow into each other, and you can have approaches or activities that might be more or less transformative, more or less accommodating, etc. So we have quite a lot of experience in concern of implementing gender transformative programs. I'm just going to quickly show you a few examples. This is some couples dialogue sessions where we bring men and women together. Usually they are couples, and we'll take them through really interactive, personal, reflective sessions which look at topics like gender norms and stereotypes and roles and power dynamics, decision-making power, violence, the causes, the consequences, the cycle of violence, making those changes, and healthy communication within a couple and working together as a family for the good of the family. So this is Malawi and Sierra Leone here. This is a role play in the bottom right, looking at the cycle of violence. Another quick example is fathers groups in Ethiopia. These were running at the same time as mothers groups. And so they were focusing on health and nutrition topics, but they were also focusing on gender topics. So it was a lot about engaging men more in childcare, relieving some of that burden on women, and also trying to change some of those dynamics around decision-making power in the home. Another example here from Niger, this is the École de Mari, or the husband's schools. Again, similar, slightly different approach, but similar goals of looking at health and nutrition topics as groups of men, and then bringing in the gender element as well. And then finally, this is one of a series of posters that we produced in Sierra Leone, which was about redefining what it means to be a man and those masculinities, kind of say that it's okay for men to be more involved in work that's traditionally seen as women's tasks, and kind of starting to shift some of those social norms around that. That's just a really quick fly through of the continuum, and hopefully it kind of shows you how we really need to consider those barriers that you pointed out at the beginning, so that we can find ways to actually address them within our programs, and that will then in turn help us to get better outcomes for our nutrition programs. So I'll hand back to Bernadette for the last part.
Thanks, Adele. And just to flag, if anybody has any questions or observations, we have a few moments, so put them in the chat. But yeah, this was a really rapid session, and I hope thinking about some of those barriers and exploring the program options that are there that Adele talked through, that perhaps we have planted some ideas or food for thought in terms of looking at gender-related issues in your CMAM programs. I mean, we all recognise the importance that women play in the lives of their children, but it's also men as fathers have a role to play, and often have a lot more power to influence. And there are lots of opportunities, I think, within CMAM programs to address these gender inequalities and engage men as well as women in these gender transformative ways, to look at rigid gender norms and attitudes and promote kind of positive shifts in attitudes and behaviours, and transform some of the power relations that we talked about earlier that benefit both women and children. But also, what we've seen is that men benefit from this process as well, and by engaging men as fathers, which is a really positive entry point, can lead to happier, healthier families, and families that where there's a lot more harmony and less violence. So there's lots of potential to do things and adapt our programs. So I don't see any comments in the chat. Can you see anybody in case I'm missing?
No, I can't.
Okay, so that's either total clarity or lack of clarity, but hopefully it was really just kind of planting some seeds of thought about what is possible. So thanks so much for coming to our session, and please do get in touch if you want to find out more. At this point, I will hand over to Mary Doyle from Valid Nutrition for the second part of the session.
Thanks very much, Bernadette and Adele. That was very interesting. Thank you. Hopefully I can share my screen now to you all. Can we see anything yet? No.
Not yet. While you're trying to set up there, I've just observed, I should have looked in the Q&A box. So let's just have a look at it.
Successful experience of transformative approaches in highly conservative countries. Yes, we do. We've done something a bit like this in Chad. And when I spoke to some of the people who had participated, I was very pleasantly surprised at how much had been taken on board, and some changes in maybe small but very fundamental things about how women and men could actually communicate with each other, and how men felt more able to actually help their wives, because you know, somebody had kind of said to them, actually, it's okay, and let's start this kind of trend together. And some of them said it was a relief to be able to actually change their behaviour. So yeah, even in countries where it is really conservative, we have seen small shifts which are all in the right direction and all need to be built on.
It's just a second one there. I think that's the final one. Given that a high percentage of wasting in children origins are in utero, and in the first 6 months, treatment of wasting begins with adequate maternal nutrition before and during pregnancy and lactation, it appears that wasting treatment and prevention are gender blind. Do you want to comment on that, Adele?
I'm just trying to think it through. Maybe we can come back to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's an importance of, you know, even the targeting on women at that stage, that they're, you know, they have husbands or other people in their lives who actually can make a lot of decisions around you know, their own consumption and behaviors from the program. So I would definitely say that we would it should be targeted beyond just the mother in that case. Do you agree, Adele?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I mean, we've also been thinking through the difference between girls and boys with wasting statistics, and how girls and boys, how girls are more likely to be boys are more likely to be malnourished probably because of gender norms and the way people see how boys should be treated, and masculinities and things like that. So again, that was another area that the more we have information and data emerging on that, the more we can actually incorporate that into our programs, and maybe you know, our messaging might need to reflect the differences in gender norms and around how mothers, and hopefully fathers too, would treat boys and girls, so that there aren't those disparities. Otherwise, it could potentially be gender blind. But yeah, we'll hand over to Mary.
Thanks, Pat and Gabrielle. Okay, over to Mary.
Thank you very much. I'll try again to share. At the moment, it's telling me my access is denied. So I'll just try here again and see if I'm successful. If not, perhaps Amy might be able to share my PDF file, but I'll just give it one more go. Let's see. I seem to have permission denied for some reason. I'll try and share a file and see if that makes a difference. Okay, this looks better. Great. Okay. Sorry about that delay, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me. My name is Mary Doyle. I'm the Communications Manager for Valid Nutrition. It's an Irish and UK registered charity that was founded by Dr. Steve Collins back in 2005. And today I'd like to talk to you about local production in the context of CMAM, and particularly around the barriers and the enablers to progress. Sure. Thank you, Amy. Perhaps, Amy, you could move the slides along for me. That would be really helpful. So firstly, and to fully understand the importance of local production in the context of successfully scaling CMAM in terms of both treatment and prevention, we need to go right back to 2001 when Steve Collins presented his then community-based therapeutic care concept and related research to concern worldwide. Steve's concept was quite simple, but clearly revolutionary in terms of its potential impact on wasting, and so it was generously supported by additional research resource funded by Concern and by Irish Aid, which in turn led to its eventual adoption by the UN in 2007 as CMAM. As we all know, coverage levels 20 years ago were depressingly low, less than 1%. However, and despite developing a community-based model that focused both on the treatment and prevention of malnutrition, and that has been proven capable of very high levels of coverage, indeed coverage rates of up to 90%, the CMAM model appears to be more focused on SAM treatment only and has unfortunately attained quite low global coverage rates since 2007, with less than 25% of children requiring treatment actually been treated. Indeed, if we are to use an alternative calculation of coverage to depress ourselves even more, and if we're to look at incidence rates rather than prevalence rates, this figure is debatably as low as 10%, but somewhere in the region of 10 to 15% anyway, because we know that children tend to experience SAM for less than a year, but they can have it multiple times in that period. But regardless of the calculation, the facts are that at least 3/4 of children requiring treatment to address starvation do not get it, and over 1 million of these die each year. And this is all happening with the backdrop of 149 million children suffering from chronic malnutrition, which, as we know, can lead to the devastating and long-term impacts of stunting. So 20 years after CTC revolution, why is this? What are the barriers to scaling up CMAM and the treatment and prevention of not just wasting, but of all forms of malnutrition? Treatment costs, both programmatic and product cost, is an obvious one for UN agents and for governments, particularly in low-income countries. And this is one of the reasons why the CTC model endorses local production, because meaningful value generation in local economies through employment and local inputs, etc., and significant cost reductions in product will, I've lost my train of thought there, and significant cost reductions in product will prove more attractive for local governments engagement rather than purchasing expensive products from offshore. And this type of public-private investment can be achieved through the generation of real demand and competition, not just for the required 200 metric tons of RUTF product, but through the development of an array of additional and alternative products that are conducive to local agricultural inputs and manufacturing, and that can in turn harness the purchasing power of poor people, i.e. of local spending, because poor people buy food, and just like any mother, a poor mother will buy nutritious food for her family, A, if it's affordable, and B, if that choice is understood and made available to mothers. And this is a key area where the development community should work with governments and the private sector to help create and support these currently absent markets. Right now, however, the full social, economic, and indeed environmental benefits associated with local production are not being realised. Local producers struggle to compete with offshore products, and this is largely due to the supply restrictions of one main and donor-dependent customer, UNICEF, and only one approved product, a milk peanut-based product that is not conducive to competitive manufacturing, to competitive local manufacturing, I should say. So what I would like to discuss today is this relationship between low CMAM coverage rates of SAM and the interlinked restricted ability of local production to accelerate not just coverage of SAM, but also to help to prevent other forms of malnutrition, as it would do in normal market circumstances. At Valid, we believe that this failing is artificially created and it's totally unnecessary. And it has arisen due to the manner in which we've applied a very restricted and centralized approach to the adoption of the original CTC concept. What we've actually done is that we've applied a supply-based approach to scaling, both the treatment and prevention of malnutrition. And this approach cannot embrace and integrate the full social and economic aspects of CTC. In practice, it actually serves to stifle the long-term, sustainable and value-adding benefits of local production by limiting the potential introduction of various nutritional products to tackle all forms of malnutrition. Next slide, please, Amy. So what's happening here is that we're currently disabling demand in two key ways: through a donor-only based system, coupled with a supply-based one main customer approach. Critically, this does not put the needs of the real customer, the child needing treatment, at the heart of what we're doing. We already know that aid alone cannot solve the problem of malnutrition. It's too big. And so we must stop smothering the potential of CMAM to end wasting and to move on to tackling the even bigger issues of chronic malnutrition. To do this, we must start to facilitate and particularly to de-risk real working partnerships between governments and private sector actors to fill that coverage gap and to end wasting once and for all. That should be our aim, to end wasting. 50 metric tons of product per year is donor demand to UNICEF, based on what UNICEF can supply given their annual budget and their logistical restrictions. But it doesn't reflect, and therefore it cannot address the actual need, real demand, the currently unmet demand from children, which is much closer to 200,000 metric tons per annum. So to properly scale up, we must be free to go about increasing supply and facilitating demand accordingly. The original CTC model focused heavily on the social and economic aspects of SAM, i.e. creating demand for treatment and building resilient local supplies to boost value chains. But CMAM has, through an aid-only based model, unfortunately reverted to what is a centralized and supply-based approach. In reality, its adoption has been little more than swapping inpatient for outpatient treatment. And so, despite 15 years of significant resources and efforts to scale CMAM, we are stuck with relatively low coverage rates for SAM, and we are a long way from tackling chronic malnutrition. So we're not adding real value because we can't meet real demand. Instead, we are inadvertently aspiring to meet donor demand only. Indeed, I sometimes read reports that suggest we currently have sufficient local manufacturing and supply of product, and we do, to meet donor demand. But if we're serious about ending the scourge of starvation and preventing the curse of stunting, we need to explore how to support the ramping up of business investment in malnutrition, to build long-term resilience through local production of a much larger and broader range of nutritional products, and including a broader range of actors. This in turn can introduce real competition and greater coverage into the markets to address wasting as well as other forms of malnutrition. But to make this happen, we urgently need to re-examine the CMAM model and to properly address what is still fundamentally a supply-side approach to SAM. Next slide, please, Amy. I would like to emphasize at this point that I'm not here to lay blame at the door of UNICEF for what are the circumstances that they have to work within. But I would like to use this quote from them to demonstrate the disabling effect of one main customer and one main product on the ability to scale CMAM and local production. The quote is taken from a recent Q&A published document by UNICEF following a webinar on their latest LTA arrangements. It states we have to limit the number of varieties of RUTF in order to balance the market and also consolidate the resources. A too diverse portfolio of RUTF would be difficult to manage. This is clearly a very honest and realistic response to what is a supply-based issue. But it is also evidence of a direct conflict with scaling up treatment for children. The same children that CMAM and RUTF have been developed to serve. Leaving aside the importance of resilience factors, it has been demonstrated by the current pandemic, and the crucial importance of the longer-term benefits of local manufacturing. The largest cost driver in the treatment of SAM is product cost. It accounts for approximately 50% of total treatment costs. So why are there no alternatives available in over 20 years? One clear reason is that UNICEF simply couldn't manage an array of products. Quite frankly, it would offer them a logistical nightmare. A smaller number of products is simpler and easier for one main customer to manage and supply. However, and in the context of reaching less than 25% of children that require treatment, we must change this reality and find a way to level the playing field for local production so that we can fully embrace product innovations that are more favourable in a local manufacturing context, and it can subsequently introduce real competition and thus real cost savings into this market. For example, and as well as the additional time and working capital costs associated with importing skimmed milk and often peanut paste from offshore, local manufacturers are also burdened with import duties for milk, for peanuts, micronutrients, and even for foil packaging for their products. Conversely, RUTF product produced offshore is free from these import duties. Additionally, it is the donor who pays the costs associated with product transportation from foreign factory gates to programme countries, where the product is actually needed. So many of the obstacles associated with local production, not least cost of debt and the cost of importing inputs, as well as the lead times and working capital, could be significantly boosted by the introduction of alternative recipes that are conducive to local manufacturing. Conversely, limiting the number of products in the market is damaging to local production. And it is also an unsustainable approach to scaling solutions for malnutrition. Next slide, please, Amy. Since it was first identified as a global issue back in the 1950s, wasting remains an apparently insurmountable problem that we have failed to eliminate. What is clear is that on their own, current stakeholders in the management of wasting cannot achieve the impact at scale that malnourished children have a right to. And therefore, Valid believes that we should involve the private sector, not just to access their funding, but to reach out to their additional capacities and capabilities so that working together, we can manage and achieve meaningful scale. Indeed, the ongoing pandemic is a recent example of how public-private partnership can work to serve mutual interests on a global level. In this case, uniting public agencies with pharmaceutical companies to craft a global response based on the strengths and mutual interests of each participating partner. Personally, I'm not concerned that the pharmaceutical companies will make profit from this pandemic. Rather, I'm relieved and grateful that their additional research, technology, and logistical strengths have been brought to bear on this issue. Last slide, please, Amy. So let me summarise what I believe are the priority actions for achieving the coverage of both treatment and prevention that CTC has proven is possible. Firstly, we need to examine and embrace how other sectors achieve real scale impact, and using our own resources and expertise in wasting, help to facilitate meaningful economic investment in programmatic countries by de-risking private sector involvement through ethical joint partnerships and real collaborations involving public agencies, public health actors, and the private sector. In so doing, we can then properly support the positive social, economic, and environmental aspects of CMAM via local manufacturing and the creation of real demand and supply value chains that are sustainable and scalable, no longer inhibiting innovation for supply reasons, but prioritizing the development of a range of efficacious nutritional products that are conducive to local manufacturing to treat and prevent all forms of malnutrition and for the benefit of all. Thank you for listening. And if there are any questions, I'd be very happy to take them.
Mary, you have some questions in the Q&A section.
Okay, thank you. I don't seem to see them. I see from some on the gender. Okay. Yeah, I see this question about Pakistan and producing RUTF locally for MAM mothers and children with modified composition WFP. The question is that for commercialization, in what category this would fall? Specialized nutrition food sold in pharmacies or just supplementary food? Okay, that's a fairly technical question and probably beyond my scope, but I would say that outside of severe acute malnutrition, when you're looking at supplementary and complementary foods, you are looking, when it comes to complementary foods, certainly to retail outlets, including pharmacies, kiosks, etc. Supplementary food, then I would need to come back to you on that. I'm not a scientist nor a nutritionist. My background is mainly in business, so it's quite a technical question in terms of what category that would fall under. So I can find that answer out for you and I can come back to you on that. Okay, I'm afraid some of these questions about weight gain and improving linear growth, I can look into them, but again, I'm not a scientist, so they're beyond my capacity to answer with any authority.
There was a question, could you repeat what CTC model stands for? Okay,
CTC was the original model that that CMAM is based upon, and it stood for Community-Based Therapeutic Care. CTC, Community-Based Therapeutic Care. Just here I see from Pat McMahon, what is Valid's view on how the right to food and CMAM programming are interconnected. So yeah, they are absolutely interconnected, and I think until we get a hold on severe acute malnutrition, it's very difficult to see how we're going to move beyond and to deal with the greater and bigger problem of chronic malnutrition in terms of numbers. So, you know, definitely how we approach CMAM is very much interlinked with the bigger picture, with all forms of malnutrition, with the treatment and prevention of malnutrition.
There was another question. Is there any other alternative for RUTF, like evidence-based recipes endorsed by UN bodies?
Yes, there are a number of other recipes that are available, but they haven't been approved yet. So some of them substitute peanuts, for example, with oats. Some of them, but they're still milk-based. So once they have efficacy data, they can go ahead with that. But the problem, as I said, is milk is a major cost and a major barrier to local production. So in terms of plant-based products, which is what Valid Nutrition the Irish charity has helped to develop over 15 years of R&D, in terms of developing recipes that are conducive and that will support local production, there are no alternatives available. And just to answer the question, at this moment in time, there's one product that's approved and available. I think that's it. Is it, Amy? So again, just to answer that question about other recipes, yes, there are other recipes. Those that just substitute peanuts with some other alternative, as long as they have efficacy data, they can be used. But the problem that I'm trying to address here is bringing down cost, and the whole point of alternatives is to boost local production and local manufacturing and local economies, investment by governments in local infrastructure and public-private engagement at programme country level. And to do that, we need to bring down the cost of alternative formulations, which can be achieved by basically changing the most expensive ingredients, which are particularly milk, which needs to be imported, but also peanut paste, which also often needs to be imported, with more plant-based, sustainable inputs that are available locally. Okay, so there are a few other questions here that are really for a food technologist about cost per 100 grams of various micronutrients, etc. So I can look into those questions and answers for you, and by all means get back to you. But it's not something that I can answer here and now, as I'm neither a scientist nor a food technologist. So it's beyond my field of expertise. So I think I'm to wrap it up at that. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention and good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.